So I will wait patiently to make sure that everything is technically correct. Got to make sure there's no, of course, with what we're doing here, that sometimes we have some echoes. So let me know if there are any echoes. And how am I looking? How am I sounding? Of course, that's what's most important. I see Derek in here. He was first. And there's D. And there's LaFord. So we're doing good on the numbers tonight. I'm glad everybody could tune in a little bit early, for a few minutes early. There's Cherie. There she is. Cherie is back after, I think she had a nice vacation. Jasmine, what's going on? But, yes, that's funny. But we got we don't have a ton of topics tonight, but we do have one very important topic that I've been asked about that I'm going to cover. I've talked about it before. We're going to get into it even more tonight, a little bit more. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. We have an update on a case that Unfound is covered. An update, something that's going on right now that started a few days ago. So we have some stuff to cover tonight. Like I said, not a lot of topics, but some deep topics. And let's see who's in here. Anne and Susan. Thank you, Susan. Heather, there she is. Heather, the sign is in the background. Joyce, great to see you. Thanks for everybody making a little time on their Wednesday evening, wherever you are, or Wednesday night. For me, it's night, being that it's 9 p.m. here. It's been beautiful here in Clearwater Beach. Beautiful sunset tonight. Last night was fairly interesting out on the water. There were two Coast Guard helicopters out there at night, and it looks like they were practicing. So they had their spotlights on. They were hovering maybe only 30 or 40 feet above the water. And it did seem like once in a while, like somebody jumped out of the helicopter into the water. So there were no boats out there or anything. It was just practicing. So that was really interesting to watch. And it wasn't really that far offshore. So you never know what you're going to see when you look out there. And even today, I took some video of a Coast Guard helicopter once again doing some maneuvers out there. Very interesting. And see who else is in here. Laura and Carol and Carrie. Thanks, everybody. Carrie made it 2 shows in a row. Way to get it done, Carrie. Cindy, how are you? Thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight. And we have a few questions. I think I have 3 questions from listeners on my list for tonight. So maybe we could examine some questions for all of you here in the live show if you'd like to ask them. And so there's that. So yeah, last night it was very interesting watching the Coast Guard do stuff out on the water. And I had my first visitor to my new place yesterday. Her name is Judith. She's a friend of mine. I've known her for probably 10 or 11 years. I was, no, longer than that. Wow, probably more like 13 years. She works with my brother Brian, and we became friends through him. And she came over yesterday, and we just kind of hung out for an hour talking about stuff. And she was my first visitor, although my brother and his wife are supposed to be coming over tomorrow evening. So we're going to have pizza and chicken wings. And yes, I'm going to make tomorrow my cheat day. Instead of Saturdays being my cheat day, tomorrow is going to be my cheat day, which is also coincidentally the day I also go to the gym with my personal trainer. So I'm really looking forward to that. They're going to get to see the place for the first time, probably sit around, watch some baseball, do whatever. Miranda and Vicky, Tracy, Michelle, thanks for everybody. Cherie says she always wanted to be in the Coast Guard. Really, you know, Cherie, one of my best friends from Star Trek, her son is now in the Coast Guard. And I can remember when he was like, 3 feet tall or something like that. And now he is in the Coast Guard all these years later. He went to the Merchant Marine Academy, etc. So I don't know where he's stationed or anything like that, but I know that he went into the Coast Guard. But that's interesting, Cherie. So I think I'll probably be having some more visitors as the days and weeks go on, but it's just taken me a while to line up everybody's schedule where they can come over and visit. Go Astros. Okay, Cherie. All right, that's just crazy. The Jack Hemby poll from last Friday, virtually everyone believes that Mary Gillett, who was his mistress at the time, what's going on, Laura? It knows what happened to him. That doesn't necessarily mean that she did anything to him or was responsible for it or anything, but virtually everyone in the discussion group thinks that Mary Gillett knows exactly what happened to Jack. I'm inclined to believe that as well. What was interesting, though, what came out of the think tank were some very interesting points that about the cell phone records and why the cell phone could have cut off on the 9th of November and it not necessarily be something suspicious. And then we also talked about this other woman who said that she was supposed to meet with Jack and then he didn't show up, and then she's the one that said he had talked about disappearing. So we kind of went in that direction in the think tank on Sunday night, and I found that to be fairly interesting. So James says he knows a Coast Guard helicopter pilot. Well, those guys have skills, James, for sure. The way those guys are, or women, are able to hover like 30 feet, 20 feet above the water and not move at all, it's just amazing. And that's what I was kind of watching last night. I'm with you, D. Okay. So we're talking a little baseball in here. Yeah, I love the Astros. Some Astros fans, and I think they have the best record in baseball too. While we're talking about it, so let me answer a question right at this time. This was a question actually that I missed last week, and I didn't catch the name of the person who asked it. But I think that this is, I don't know if I've ever been asked this question before. I think I have, but it's been a while. Miranda says it was a good think tank on Sunday night. Miranda, I agree. I agree. She's a girl. Great. Okay, great, James. There was a question that somebody asked me that last week that I didn't get to. Have I ever interviewed someone who I think is actually the guilty party? The answer is no. No, I don't. I think that the way we go about finding guests between myself and Emily and whoever else, no, I don't believe that. No. Especially considering that most of the guests that I have are women. In fact, we haven't had a male guest on Unfound in over a year. And so there's that. And most of those are mothers, and it's mostly grown children. So it's hard to imagine a situation that is the circumstances. Now, it may be that maybe a couple of guests didn't say, I didn't get out of them as much as I could, especially in those early interviews where I didn't have as much experience as I do now. But when we say a guilty party, meaning it was actually a murder and this person pulled a gun or a knife or whatever, the answer is no. No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. Is it possible that since I've interviewed some of these people, maybe they found out more, maybe you have better suspicions about what happened or something? Yes. But actual outright suspects, no. Yeah, LaFord, that's a really good question. I will tell you that there's a case off the top of my head that I'm thinking about where I think the guest probably knew more than she was saying, but I'm not going to let you know what case that is. I don't want to, I don't like to do those things. But there is a case that comes off the top of my head where I look back at that interview and I say, you know what? I probably could have pushed her a little more. I probably could have asked better questions, etc. And I admit, sometimes I don't get it exactly right, no matter how much planning we do. Carrie says, I don't think a guilty party would want to be interviewed, especially if they knew the show and how much research goes into an episode. Carrie, you're probably right about that. However, as you also know, sometimes after episodes have come out, people that we view as being suspicious, at least a little bit, have contacted me. I've had discussions with them. I've told you about them. I don't really know how much has come out of those conversations. In my opinion, the conversations only further supported my belief about what I believed happened in the disappearance. But I try to pass those discussions on to all of you. But that doesn't happen, as you know, very often. It happened, I guess, in Juanita Nelson's case. It happened in James Walker's case. It happened in Jansen Brewer, Daniel Braden's case. But it obviously not very often, considering that we have 130 cases under our belt now. Derek is watching Jefferson's special. I'm going to just pretend I didn't read that, Derek. Have you ever thought the police were guilty of a disappearance? Well, James, it depends what you mean by police. As I've stated a few times, I believe that at least 10% of the cases that Unfound has covered, that a police officer of some type is a suspect. It's 10%, and I can almost name them off the top of my head. Of course, a lot of people are automatically going to think Tom Brown, but I'm going to think about Robin Abrams. I'm going to think about Nikki McCown. I'm going to think about, some other ones. Maybe some cases that we covered that aren't as well known. But when you say police, like a complete police department, even in Tom Brown's case, I don't believe that. All right. Even if we want to be suspicious of Nathan Lewis or Pine Gregory or whoever, I'm not inclined to believe every single person in law enforcement in Hemphill County knows what happened to Tom Brown. Even if we discover that a couple deputies, the sheriff and a deputy, had something to do with his murder, I'm not inclined the entire department knew that. So it just depends, James, what you mean by police. I do believe that there are police officers who are responsible for some of the disappearances that we've covered, yes. But I believe that independently. They were acting as individuals, not as some grand conspiracy by an entire group, law enforcement department. So there you go. Shree, right? The Brewer case, that was one I was thinking about, right? Where I got to talk to Scotty Hughes after the fact. Right. And I haven't heard from him since. Of course, I blocked him, so that maybe makes it a little tough. Had to block him. Usually don't like doing that, but if people can't have mature conversations, then I don't have any time for it. So the update that I want to do, and maybe some of you who are in the discussion group especially know that this is going on right now, but on Monday, sheriff's office, local police were at a home 4 miles away from where Teresa Butler disappeared. Of course, she disappeared in Risco, Missouri, and this the cops were at this very little. Unfortunately, I did not write the town down. Unfortunately, but 4 miles south of her house where she disappeared, the police were at a home there, and it seemed like they were walking out of the house with building materials, so like pieces of wood, and I'm inclined to believe that these could be parts of the floor of this house, at least the house of the floor or a wall. I was alerted to this by a few different people, including my guest for that episode, Amy Lacey, who was Teresa's best friend. She was the interview going way back. This is going way back, to the beginning of 2017, so over 2 years ago. It seems like yesterday that I did that interview, and that was one I was really looking forward to doing. I'd known about Teresa's disappearance for a long time, so to finally talk to Amy was really good, and that's still one that is very prominent when I look back at all the cases, it kind of sticks out in my mind because I knew that I'd been thinking about it for a few years before I started Unfound. At this point, I don't know what got this started. Okay, and Amy doesn't either. She um, gave me some opinions. She, gave me a couple rumors that are going around, and I don't know if I really want to get into that. But I will say that allegedly at one time, a guy or guys who knew Dale, Teresa's husband, one of them, I believe, lived there. Okay, that does not necessarily mean that her husband, who committed suicide last year, had anything to do with her disappearance. Okay, but the rumor is that at one time, I guess specifically when Teresa went missing in 2006, that one of these guys lived in this home. But still, all these years later, 13 years later, why are they now just, and I don't even think that guy lives in that house anymore. I think it's rented out. I think somebody who has nothing to do with Teresa Butler's disappearance lives there now. Why? What got started? I have no idea. Amy says she's not sure either. She's kind of checked some things. She has no idea. So I don't have any. I don't. Tallapoosa, Missouri. Thank you, Carrie, for getting that information for me. So in Teresa's case, I've always inclined to believe that it was, some sort of burglary or something that went wrong. Maybe they didn't know she was there. They didn't know she was there with her kids. I think that it started out as somebody maybe breaking into her vehicle and she went outside to see what was going on and things went bad from there. That's what I've always been inclined to believe. There's nothing that I've heard so far in the coverage, the local coverage. I know the reporter there did a video right outside this house. There's nothing that she said or that I have read that has changed my mind about that. Okay, I don't know. Let's see what is being said here. Bree saying, I hope I didn't miss much. YouTube never notifies me. Well, you just have to watch the beginning again, Bree. I apologize. We're talking about Teresa Butler and an update on her case. Shelly says, hey, Shelly, what's going on? Thanks for joining in tonight. Great to see you. In fact, I need to talk to you. Maybe after this is over. Blaze says, I think many cases will be solved if police acted quickly instead of waiting. That is surely true, Blaze. Carrie says, I listened to the Teresa Butler episode today. I guess I hadn't heard that one before today. Interesting case for sure. Yeah, Carrie. Like I said, I knew about Teresa Butler's disappearance for years. Going back to when I still lived in Las Vegas, which would have been 2011 or before then. Well before I ever started Unfound, but Teresa's case was one that I really wanted to cover. If I, once I decided I was going to start Unfound, that was one that was on the list. But I got to cover this one because of the circumstances, everything that happened there. One thing at a time, Cherie says. Marcus, what's going on? Justino, what's going on? Some people getting in here. A little late, that's okay. Bree, Cherie is saying to Bree, you have to hit the bell to get the notifications. That's interesting. Thanks for letting everybody know about that, Cherie. So, we also have to remember that, if some of you maybe you have to remember, I guess I have to remember, that that's an old case. Of course, Carrie, who I know has been listening to Unfound for a while, she just was listening to that case today. If you're not familiar with that case, I urge you to go back and listen to it. And I don't want to get into all of the details, but some of the most important points you should know is that her husband was a suspect, but he seemingly has a pretty solid alibi that he was over an hour away at work. He worked nights, and she disappeared during the night. But he committed suicide on the anniversary of the disappearance last year. So 12 years later, he committed suicide. So now their two kids have no parents. It's very sad. So there's that. Also, I think it was last year there was some digging that went on, not near this house, but somewhere I think closer to where Teresa lived at the time. That the police were out there, sheriff's office, they had a backhoe, they were digging somewhere. To my knowledge, nothing ever came of that. Amy never told me anything about that, so I haven't heard anything. But something, maybe a key piece of information that came out since we did the interview in 2017 is that a radio that was stolen from the house actually was found, I think, like the next day or the day after. I think it was, no, it was a camera. I apologize. It was a camera, like some sort of VHS or VCR, digital video camera was found, I believe, in a ditch somewhere. It had been stolen from the house and then it was found. I don't know if there was any footage on it or any videos on it that could give them any clues, but that was something that we didn't know when we did the interview in 2017. But besides that, I don't think anything else has really happened in the way of evidence. In fact, I would say that probably what's going on in the last couple of days probably the biggest thing that's gone on since the disappearance happened. Like I said, there was some digging that went on last year, but I don't, we didn't get any, I didn't get a very good feel for that. This certainly seems to be more credible, but we know how these things work. It can look credible, it can sound credible, and then nothing comes of it. So I wouldn't get your hopes up, but who knows? Maybe this is a situation like Zoe Campos where, personally, I didn't think that it was much going on that day, and then before you know it, they found Zoe's remains, and Carlos Rodriguez was in custody. So you never quite know how these things are going to turn. Carrie says, I live here. It's a couple hours from me. I can't get over how little coverage for me to never hear about it. That's interesting, Carrie, because my perception is that they've done some coverage in the last couple years there. The way I remember it, not long, I think that episode came out in February 2017. No more than a month later, a couple months later, Dale, Teresa's husband, who's now deceased, did an interview. And that was the first interview he did with news since virtually when she disappeared in 2006. And to my knowledge, they've done a couple other things since then, including covering the digging that went on last year. So, Carrie, I'm not really sure what to say about that. Maybe just missed it. But my perception is for a case that's 13 years old, I think local news has done as much as they've been able to do, especially in recent years, especially getting Dale on camera to talk when he hadn't done that in years. Bree says, the Teresa Butler case happened when I was 9. Holy crap, I'm 22 now. Yeah. And I was 35 when it happened. Oh, to be 35 again. Yeah, LaFord, you should listen to that one. Laura is asking me, sure, we could talk about a little PayPal information here, Laura. Laura wants to know if I want to contribute to Unfound via PayPal, will that automatically make me eligible for the benefits of Patreon? Or do I have to make a separate account for Patreon? My opinion, Laura, is that you should probably join on Patreon. However, if you want to contribute through PayPal, depending on how much you contribute, you would get the same benefits according to the level that, depending. I try to even it out as best I can. So, yes, you would, once again, depending on how much, and I'm not telling you what to give. I'm not doing that. It just depends. But yes, you would automatically be eligible for at least some of the benefits on Patreon. The simple answer to that is yes. However, probably the easier thing to do is to start an account on Patreon. My opinion. You're leaving us, D? What's the deal? Where are you going, D? All right, have a good night, y'all. Okay, D's checking out. If you don't know, D is the one that always puts the camel picture in the group, which I love. Okay, Laura. Okay, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it, Laura. Thank you. So that's what's going on in Teresa Butler's case. Like I said, I really don't know where it's going, and I don't think that Amy, who has once again been following this since the beginning, she was my guest for the episode. I don't know if she knows where it's going either. I know she's very much on pins and needles. I think I can say that. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Cherise points out at $12 gets you into the think tank on Sunday nights, Laura. And we have good discussions, very small group of people, but we really get into the case a lot deeper than anywhere else. So there's that. Okay, so we got Teresa Butler. And if anything breaks on that, of course, it will be posted in the group. I will try to get to it if I'm not doing something else. But I know that there are several other people that have their eyeballs on that case and will post about it as well. So if something happens, I think the Unfound Podcast discussion group will be a good place to be looking for it. Veronica asked, just started watching your channel, I guess, on YouTube. Which episode would you recommend, or which is your most watched episode? Well, I'm not going to recommend an episode to you, Veronica, because that would be wrong. That's not really how I do things. My best recommendation would be to start at the beginning with Suzanne Lau and start at the beginning and go up. That's a choice. But the most watched episode on YouTube is the Flight 370 episode. If you're into disappearances of jets, it's a good one. And I think that Unfound has done the best Flight 370 coverage of anyone out there, mainly because I found the main expert in the world to talk to about it, Jeff Wise, who's now become a good friend of mine. So that's what I would recommend if you're into that. I would have to say after that, I'm going to guess that the Thomas Brown episode is probably the most watched after the Flight 371. I know there are a couple out there. I think the April Pitzer episode has been watched quite a bit too. So there you go, Veronica. Lars, I can't stand that I'm missing the think tank. Laura LaFord would love to have you. I think anybody who's taken part has gotten a lot out of it. Even the people who don't, can't tune in on Sunday evenings. I know that they watch it afterwards. And we've definitely come up with some things in there. Really drilling down. Sometimes we come to conclusions that are different from like the polls in the group. And sometimes we can't find a consensus. But everybody's opinions are voiced. We talk theories. We talk things that, don't come up in the episode. However, we should know we don't release any new facts. All the facts there is to know about a case are done in the episode. Everything you need to know about an episode, about a case, is done in the episode. I hold nothing back in there. In the think tank, what we do is we discuss those facts. Okay, that's what we do. So I don't want anybody ever to think that I'm holding stuff back for Patreon. I do not do that. I never do that. Thank you, Laura. You watched that episode. Thank you. I appreciate it. I saw that, Joyce. I saw you're gonna get into the think tank now. I'm gonna hold you to that. I better see you there because I think you'll enjoy it, and it's a good way, I think, to learn more about missing persons cases and things. So there's that. Laura, I don't know if it's Laura that's in the group here or another Laura. I've seen like 10 different Lauras. Laura asked me, Ed, you don't seem to have a lot of trust in cadaver dogs, and maybe she just means dogs in general. That's a great question. I'm going to answer that right now. Generally, when I talk about my lack of confidence in dogs, it doesn't necessarily have to do with cadaver dogs, okay? When I talk about dogs, I generally mean tracking dogs. Dogs that are given a piece of a human's clothing and then they go off out there trying to find which direction the person went. You know, you know what I'm talking about. That's generally what I mean when I talk about dogs. But I will talk about cadaver dogs in a moment. But those types of dogs, which I think we talk about a lot more in disappearance cases, is that the problem I have is there's just too many stories about dogs, tracking dogs, sniffer dogs, going off in one direction, and then when a disappearance or murder is solved, or a suicide or whatever happened, the body is in the exact opposite direction. I've just read too many stories about that. Okay? To put my confidence and say the dogs are always right. They're not. Or as I like to say, two-legged animals find way more missing people than four-legged animals, meaning humans find more missing people than dogs do. Okay? Dogs are just a tool. Okay? They may help, they may not help. They're like lie detector tests. It may be true, could be false. Dogs are just animals like any, who knows what's in their minds? And I know they're trained and everything else. Well, you know what? You know, animals that are in the circus are trained too. Do they even use animals anymore? But we all know the stories about how lions and tigers and bears have gotten out of control. We know about Siegfried and Roy. They're trained too, and they're probably trained better than any other animals on the earth. And still, sometimes they just wake up in a mood and they don't do what they're supposed to do. And so, there's that. Cherie says no trust in dogs here. Man, you and I, Cherie, are agreeing way too much these days. Laura, you meant all dogs. Okay, well, I'm going to break them down here in a second, but that's part of the. So you, Laura, you are the one that meant dogs. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's my reasoning. Okay, there's just the case that I always think of. There was a case in Michigan, Illinois, where there was a young woman. I think she worked in a hospital. Something went on with her mind. She went into a hotel. She looked lost. She got back in her car, and then her car was found later. There was a tire had blown out it, or it's low on air or something. Cops show up, dogs show up, and the dogs sniffed around, and it seemed to look like this young woman walked down the road and then got in a car with somebody. And that's what the police said. If I could think of the name of the missing woman, or I would tell you. But eventually, like a week later, they found her in the body of water right next to where her car was parked. The dogs never went in that direction at all. And they believe that she kind of just, something happened, and whether she committed suicide or something like that, there are no allegations that, she was murdered or anything else. But the important part is the dogs never went over to the to the bayside, to the lakeside, to the edge of the water, and sniffed and said, yeah, she went in here. They made it look like she got in a car and took off, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to think, I guess, being that her car got stranded on the side of the road. So this is what I always think of when it comes to dogs following, scents and things like that. I listen to it. But, and I also know, once again, behind the scenes of people that I talk to, there are a lot of charlatans when it comes to dogs. People claiming that they have dogs that can do things, and it's just a scam. So there's that too. I have nothing against these people who do this. I want you to know that. But the dogs fail so often that that I can't put a lot of credence in it. Okay, it's not like it's not like the laws of physics. It's very questionable. The circus doesn't even happen anymore, Bree says. Yeah, that's why when I said it, I was like, yeah, that. Okay, Derek, you'll be back. Carrie thinks dogs have skewed cases. That's possible, Carrie. Once again, I love animals. I know what people are trying to do, and I do know that there are situations where dogs have found people. Okay, I know that. But it is not a hard and fast rule at all. At all. That's why if that's why anytime I do an interview, we talk about dogs, but for me personally, I don't know how seriously I take it. Blaze, humans have put more into the calculation of airflow, etc. I personally truck dogs, not so much the handlers. Yeah, and that should be known. That's true. The dogs are only good as the people handling them. That's true. Laura, you're saying, oh, well, I'm guessing you're talking. Yeah, this case, once again, I'm wishing that I could. I wish I could remember the young woman's name on that case, but I just can't. Bria says, had anybody watched A Matter of Perception on YouTube? I think their method of possibly finding the missing very is interesting. They use the stars to find the missing. Brie, we are not going to get into psychics and astrology here. Okay, we're not going to do that. That's not really what we do. I don't, psychics and things like that. I just don't. Carrie says, how many weeks did they waste on the Haley Dunn case because the dogs tracked in opposite direction she was actually at? I don't personally know what happened in that case, Carrie, but if that's what happened, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Cherie, dogs at my kids' school supposedly sniffed out ibuprofen. Okay, Cherie. Courtney, too many things get in the way of them being accurate. The cold, the wind, many things. I love dogs, but too many things could go wrong. Right. I agree. Now, as far as cadaver dogs, see, to me, that's a little different because you bring in cadaver dogs. I know that they were used on September 11th. And of course, there's the very well known story that the dogs weren't finding anybody because, of course, a lot of those people, there was nothing to find, unfortunately. And I remember the dogs weren't finding anything. The dogs get frustrated. And they actually had to put live people there for the dogs to find them to keep their spirits up, I guess, or something. And this is exactly what I mean. The dogs aren't machines. That they aren't like a metal detector, for example. Dogs are not human detectors. They have their own feelings and motivations and things. And as I just stated, the handlers back on September 11th, when they were going through the World Trade Center rubble, they actually had to keep motivating the dogs because the dogs weren't finding anybody. So when it comes to cadaver dogs, I'm inclined to maybe believe them a little more, but cadaver dogs, the way I understand it, are only brought in when they know that there is possibly a dead person in the area. Well, that's a lot different than trying to track somebody and you don't know what direction they went in. That's a lot different. That's a lot harder. So I think there's a difference. My inclination is to believe maybe cadaver dogs are a little more successful, but it also leads me to believe that their job is a little easier than dogs that are trying to track which direction a person went. Carrie says she's big and digging on the Haley Dunn case for years. Just not familiar with that case, Carrie. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay. Cadaver dogs, Carrie says, I think they tend to be more accurate. Death smells like death. Live people each smell differently. That's an interesting point, Carrie. I think it's an interesting point. So that's kind of my general overview of dogs. I believe in humans more, simply because I think history shows that humans find way more missing people than dogs do. But we know the dogs are used in quite a few cases. And how successful are they? Not very. Not very. The percentage isn't zero, but it's not even 10% either. So, but I understand why they're used. I understand that. So, there you go. Let's talk. This is going to be a long discussion. Somebody had asked me a few days ago what I think about the GEDmatch situation that has changed with I'm not familiar with that disappearance. Andrea McDonald, I'm just not familiar with it, Laura. Sorry. I'm going to talk about GEDmatch and what has happened with that recently within, I guess, the last week or something, where now if everybody, of course, GEDmatch is a place that is being used by law enforcement to use to match DNA, and some of these cases are getting solved. For example, most probably well known is the original Night Stalker. And now, because of things that have happened, now people have to opt in if they want their DNA to be able to be used by law enforcement to solve cold cases. So originally, anybody who had their DNA in GEDmatch was automatically opted in. Okay, but there was and I'll get into that. But now, because of recent events, everybody is now, who was opted in, is now everybody is out, and now they have to voluntarily choose to opt in. So I guess you go to the site, click on something. I'm guessing I've never used it. I know my sister did our family genetics with DNA a few years ago, and I'm 67% Irish. No surprise there, maybe. But I think that she used 23andMe, I think. I forget now. So you have to understand why this changed. I think it's very important to understand why this changed, because I think everybody is just outraged, and I think they've just read the headline, but I don't think that they've read why this happened. We have to understand something. The rules for GEDmatch, as when it came to be, is that they would only take part in cases that were murders. I mean, very violent things that happen. Murders, rapes, things like that. Okay? But what happened was that some recent case within the last few years, they bent. So what I'm saying is, it wasn't just some blanket thing. If you were in GEDmatch and your DNA could be used for cases, that doesn't mean it was for every case that's out there. That's a misconception. Now, the way I understand it, because I was reading about this yesterday and today because I knew that I was going to talk about it. What it was GED's rules were that they would only do them for the most violent of crimes. Why they did that, I don't know. I'm not sure. The problem is that they went against their own rule. Okay? And some defense lawyer who was then found out about this, he found out about it, and this is what I've said. I think the defense lawyers eventually are going to get wise to some of these things that have been going on that I think are questionable. And because of that, this put GEDmatch in a very difficult position. They broke their own rule, bent it to help out a case that they said that they wouldn't come, and these are the rules that they came up with themselves, and now they're bending it. And it's because this caused so much of a problem for them, they just said, the heck with it. The heck with it. So everybody is now opted out. All right? If anybody who's ever used GEDmatch wants their DNA to be available to law enforcement, they have to go in and opt back in. Okay? Now, from what I understand, that now means that even more cases are going to be able to be, their GED is going to allow their DNA to be even used for more cases. But the important part is that people now have to opt in, not because of law enforcement, something they did or anything like that, but because GEDmatch couldn't follow their own rules and it got them in trouble. Okay? Because some smart lawyer found out that they had done this. And I'm going to guess that probably wasn't the first time. What I'm saying is, it seems that maybe GEDmatch was picking and choosing the cases that they were going to allow the DNA to be used for. Okay, when it came to cases that weren't within their criteria, they were doing it on a case-by-case basis, and some defense lawyer found out about that and didn't like it. Okay, So there's that. That's why this happened. It's not because of anything else than GEDmatch itself, the way I read it. Okay? All right, so because of this, now people must opt in. Everybody is now automatically registered as opt out. Okay? But some defense lawyer found a loophole. Now, I should tell you, this is not exactly, I'm looking over to my left, I'm looking at my notes. This is not exactly how I expected things were going to change. I still think they're going to change, and I've been reading a lot. I read a lot this morning about how there are lawyer sites that are talking more and more about the legality of warrantless, the key word is warrantless DNA collection. Warrantless, not, now we know that if you get a warrant, you can get some DNA. The big thing that is a big question mark right now is warrantless, meaning, once again, how they got DNA for the original Night Stalker. They didn't serve him with a warrant and say, we want your DNA. They got it after he did something. Like, I forget exactly what it was. It was a straw or something. He was out somewhere, or it was his garbage, and they went and got DNA off of one of his things, something that he had used. They didn't actually get the DNA off of him. So there's a difference between warrant searches, like we understand them, like, and we'll get into that in a second, and warrantless searches, where it seems like it's just like the Wild Wild West right now. All right? We have to remember something about all of this when it comes to DNA. Carrie, they pulled his trash, right? And we're going to get into that, Carrie, before this is all over. So this is going to take a while. We have to remember something. The issue here is not crime solving. Okay, that is not the issue. The issue is rights. Okay, are people's rights being invaded by getting their DNA off of things that they get rid of? Once again, warrantless searches. When there's a warrant, like they've gone to a judge, the police have presented evidence, the judge says, yes, you can get DNA from this guy. Then they get a warrant, and they can get that DNA from, just by any means necessary. But what we're talking about here is warrantless DNA searches. But the issue is rights. Remember, DNA doesn't exist to solve crime. DNA exists because it's part of us. Without DNA, we don't exist. DNA in any living thing, animals, plants, trees, whatever, DNA is what makes us us. DNA doesn't exist to solve crimes, unlike lie detectors, and other things that people, we use to solve crimes. DNA is not for that purpose. DNA is part of us, okay? Once again, like fingerprints, that's even different. Fingerprints aren't building blocks of us. That is just some wrinkles on our skin. That's even different than DNA. Shuri, I get it. I can see problems from a defense perspective. I do too. James, thank you for expanding answer. Last week I asked about Ancestry.com. Well, I'm going to get even more into this, James, in a second. I just want to catch up with these comments. Without DNA, we wouldn't be here. Derek, you're exactly right. Thank you. Carrie, I don't think so. You throw it out, it's no longer yours. No expectation of privacy. Same as taking a picture out in public view. Well, the thing is, Carrie, is this. Okay, I'm going to get into this, and I want you to think very critically about this. Remember, and I'm just going to go down my notes. Exists because of us. It's only through science that DNA has become a crime-solving technique. Okay? DNA does not exist to solve crimes. It's through science that we've been able, as humans, been able to use it to solve crimes. Okay? This is no different, kind of like fingerprints. But fingerprints, even that is different. However, people's rights must be protected. China, for example. However, when you give up, well, the thing is, Shuri, is when you commit a crime, do you give up certain rights? No, you don't. You don't give up certain rights until you're convicted of that crime. Okay? You don't give up any rights until you're convicted of that crime. Until then, you're no different than me and you. That's how it works. Innocent until proven guilty. And then if you get thrown in jail, of course, then of course your rights are surely restricted. But let's think of another example. Let's think about North Korea or China. Of course, in China, they're now grading their citizens on how good they are. Okay, how do they do that? They do that by tracking everyone. Now there is much, of course, lower crime in China than there is in the United States. But anybody who believes in free speech, freedom of religion, or anything like that could never live there. Could never live there. There are no, you don't need warrants. There are no search and seizure laws and things like that in China. If they want to if they want to throw you into some sort of prison camp, they can do that. They can do that. Okay, but what's going on in China? They're starting to collect DNA of all their citizens. Okay, and see, to me, that is the big fear about all of this. Because as soon as you say that any DNA can be collected by anybody, anywhere, out there, okay, out there, then what is to stop somebody, a government, from starting a DNA database? Okay, that is a real fear. That is a real fear. Okay, and I know, well, government would do that, and we have, that's, so we're going to get to Carrie. I'm going to get to you in a second, but I'm just detailing, we can have a very, very safe society. And people talk about, well, we have gun violence in the United States and rape and all these things. Look how much more crime there is in the United States and many other Western civilizations, and that is true. Okay, that is true. Okay, and we could easily get rid of most of it if we want to invade everybody's rights, very easily. And there are examples of that all over the world. Okay, if we wanted to go that direction, I don't think anybody wants to go in that direction. And and being that we talk about disappearances, is that in China, you can actually look it up, even on Wikipedia, that China makes its own citizens disappear. So, this is, I'm not here to talk badly of China, but it's a country we all know. We know what goes on there. We know that it's different in the United States. We know you don't have to be on any side of the political spectrum to know that what they do there is very different than what we do here, especially when it comes to law enforcement. So let's talk about a court case, and this is what I want to talk to you. Carrie, I see what you're talking about regarding garbage. Now, you should know there is a Supreme Court case that is called Greenwood versus California. All right, because I think it's important for all of you to know that this concept of garbage being able to be searched without a warrant is a relatively new concept in the United States. I can't speak for any other country in the world, but in the United States, searching garbage to get without a warrant or something is a relatively new idea in the United States, as far as we understand it, regarding law enforcement and it being accepted around the United States, all 50 states. Okay? It's not something that has been around, since 1776 or 1787, whatever year you want to pick. It's a relatively new idea, and that's really why it made its way to the Supreme Court. And Greenwood versus California is not a very old case. Okay, it's not. Now, you need to know the facts of that case because it's the it's the finding of that case that forms the basis for warrantless DNA searches. And any lawyer will tell you that. Okay, what happened in that case is there was a drug dealer and he was dealing out of his house, and the police couldn't get inside the house. So what they did was they waited till he took out his trash, and there was drug paraphernalia in the garbage that he tried to cover up, and he put it out on the curb. After he left, Greenwood left, the cops went in there, started digging through his garbage, found the drugs, and charged him with drug crimes. Greenwood fought it because there was case law on his side saying that was an illegal search. That's my own personal, it was an illegal search and seizure, and he's protected against that due to the Fourth Amendment. Blaze, that may already be the case. But he lost. But you should know something. When it got to the Supreme Court, it was not a unanimous decision. I think that the case was 6-2. So 6 of the justices agreed that the search, that anytime you put garbage out on the corner, it becomes community material. And their reasoning was that, well, anybody could come along, and if you put something out there like a lamp that you don't want anymore and somebody takes it, you can't automatically claim that it was stolen because you put it out on the curb. That was their reasoning. Okay, that was their reasoning. There were 2 of the justices who dissented. Okay, that is what has made the case law that now exists in the United States in 2019. But once again, it's relatively new case law. All right, and in fact, I think Greenwood versus California is from the 1980s. Okay, so it seems pretty clear cut. But the problem is that, are we now saying that our DNA is garbage? See, I don't look at DNA as being the same as garbage. Garbage, or cups and straws and everything else, these are products that we use. Okay? DNA is part of us. All right? So, if I were a defense attorney, I would be saying, are you saying as soon as I go out my door, if my DNA can be collected anywhere at any time, then really I have no Fourth Amendment rights when I leave my house? And I don't think that's what the Founding Fathers thought. Because we have our freedom of religion when we leave the house. We have our Second Amendment. We have our freedom of assembly and all these other rights that we have when we leave our house. But suddenly, when we leave our house and we just happen to leave our DNA somewhere, suddenly our rights go out, our Fourth Amendment rights go out the window. Okay? And I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. All right? I understand if you get a warrant. I understand if there's evidence that somebody did something and you need their DNA and you go to a judge and you get a warrant and then go to the person and swab their cheek or whatever. But just being able to, because you can't go, the big problem is you can't go anywhere without leaving your DNA somewhere. I leave it in my car. I leave it when I go to the gym. I leave it when I go to Starbucks unintentionally. Unintentionally. So do we believe that we give up our Fourth Amendment rights when we leave our house? I don't believe people think like that. I think they think if we go out and I'm walking around, that a policeman just can't come up to me and, pat me down. And we know we don't like that. We know all about profiling in the United States when it comes to minorities. It's wrong. It's wrong. They get pulled over for no reason all the time. They get frisked all the time. It's wrong. Okay? So how is that any different than somebody just being able to randomly go up and take your DNA off of something that you used in public? I don't see the difference. And really, I'm frankly surprised that a defense attorney hasn't figured that out yet. Maybe they have. What is on your person not visible is protected, which is where, what about personal property? What about on and on about your person? Property laws, so many things to consider. Well, Carrie, that's right. What I'm saying, Carrie, is that when you go out, and do you believe that you are giving up your DNA willingly when you go out in public? This is, I think, the thing. I see DNA as being different than garbage. Okay? And I think that the current DNA laws, warrantless DNA searches, DNA is different than garbage. Okay, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Okay, and Mike says several states, including California, take and keep the DNA of every newborn. Yeah. You know, I just don't believe in that. I think this is why this is eventually, you know, the thing you have to remember, you know, what makes Greenwood versus California so complex is that, so you're telling me if he took this garbage out and he set it down, as soon as he walked away from it, he doesn't own it anymore. See, this is this idea of when do we not own something and when do we do something? You know, the thing is, if he was walking his trash out to the curb, they wouldn't be able to take it. As soon as it drops out of his hand, though, it becomes community material. Since when do we judge ownership on how close we are to something? My car, I'm up on the 8th floor right now. My car is 8 floors down. I still own it. If somebody breaks into it, it's still against the law. So I just don't think it's as clear cut as everybody has made it out to be. Okay? You got kicked out, James. I'm sorry to hear that. Let me see what some people are saying. The only people who want to be on surveillance are on the Big Brother show. That's true, Bree. Blaze says, I think our government already has a DNA database. Every service has a blood test on file. With that, they can then trace by family trees just about anyone in the NSA, in my opinion. What about personal property? What about honor? About our person, property laws? So many things to consider. I guess, you know, my thing, Carrie, is I don't think that we automatically give up our search and seizure rights just because we go out in public. Okay? Especially when it is something that our DNA gets left places that we can't help. If you're going to tell me the only way I can protect myself against my DNA being taken is staying at home, then that doesn't sound like much of an existence. And me being the homebody that I am. We can't charge a trash man with theft. You have intentions of discarding it. Well, like I said already, Kara, I think I see DNA and garbage as being different. Is DNA garbage? That's what it simply comes down to. Do you believe that your DNA that makes you up as a person is garbage? Do you own it? Do you own your DNA, or is it part of you? That's the big question here. Because if you own it, if you own DNA, then it is garbage. And when you go out and you dispose of it, it is. But if DNA is not garbage, if it's part of you, it's not something, it's not a product, but part of you, then the laws regarding it should be different. Okay? That's right. You have intention. You're right. You have intentions of discarding, but you don't have any intentions of discarding your DNA. It just happens because you're out in public. And should the law be able to take advantage of that? Because if it can, then... But the DNA... No, not so much the DNA, but what the DNA is attached to. Well, they're only interested in the DNA, Carrie. They don't care whether the original Night Stalker went to McDonald's or Burger King and what kind of straw it was on. They only care about the DNA itself. Okay? Well, you can't change your DNA, so it's personal property. But do we own it? That's my question. When we think about our DNA, do we actually own it? Because if we own it, that means we can get rid of it. Well, we can't get rid of our DNA or it would be dead. We can't get rid of all our DNA. We may own money, and we can get rid of all of it. And we can own cars and get rid of all of them. We can own houses and get rid of all of them. We can own insurance policies and cash them out and things, but we can't get rid of our DNA because we'd be dead. The trace DNA is pretty spooky. How many people touch a shirt before you buy it and put it on? Yes. Carrie, Cherie says, Carrie, what is on or about your person could actually be in your reach, too. That's the way I interpret the law. That could mean the passenger seat of a car. What I'm saying is that I don't believe that DNA is garbage. And so I don't believe that the laws regarding garbage should govern the laws of how DNA is collected. I view DNA as being us. I don't believe it as being personal property. We don't own the DNA. We can't sell it. We can't get rid of, we get rid of it, but if we got rid of all of it, we'd be dead. We wouldn't exist. Or we can shed skin cells and things like that, but we can't get rid of all of it, so we don't own it. So the other case that you might want to think about looking up that is relevant to this is Maryland versus King, and that's also interesting. And Cherie, this kind of goes back to what you were saying before. That case was a case in which this guy King wanted to argue that they swabbed his mouth before he was arrested. All right, so that's another situation where he had done something, and just because he had nothing to do with it wasn't rape or anything like that, just because he was in police custody for something, they swabbed his mouth. Okay, is that constitutional? Once again, he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. He's just in custody. All right, remember, he's in custody. He still has his First Amendment rights. He still has his Miranda rights. He still has his rights to counsel and all of these other things. Since when should he give up his rights to his DNA? And so he fought that, and unfortunately, I didn't write down what the results of that case were. But that also worked its way up through the state and federal courts as well. Uh-oh, you have a tornado warning, Carrie. Okay, gotta go. Take care. Layla, so if the cops want a discarded cup from a trash can, should they need a warrant from the suspect and the owner of the trash receptacles? Layla, this once again goes back to, I think that the law regarding, it all depends. You know, the tough thing about the Greenwood versus California, Layla, is they weren't looking for this Greenwood's DNA. They were looking for drugs. They didn't want his DNA. They didn't care about his DNA. They were looking for the actual product that was part of the crime. Okay? Well, even if our DNA is collected, DNA is not part of the crime. A lot of DNA is collected because the act is the crime. Okay? The act is the crime. The rape is the crime. You know, your DNA being on somebody else is not illegal unless it was put there during a rape or a murder or something like that. We have to remember that. So if the cops want a discarded cup from a trash can, should they need a warrant from the suspect if they want to get the person's DNA? Yes. That's what I believe. But if the trash is the actual crime, then no. Then no. So I'm going to keep saying this. I think this is where law is going to go in the United States. Now, you should know, there are other countries where this is already becoming a fact, where police, like Australia, in certain areas of Australia, it is now illegal for police to do warrantless DNA, gathering of DNA. Okay? The big issue, once again, is warrantless. Okay? If the cops go to court, the DA goes, they have all this evidence that this person, man or woman, did something, and DNA is needed for something, then yes, I would go along with that. But warrantless, just randomly going out and picking up people's DNA and everything, I think eventually it's going to get shut down. And I think that when it comes to GEDmatch and things, I think it's eventually going to change. I know that that's going to upset a lot of people. I know that it maybe might mean the original Night Stalker might not have been caught. I get it. I get it. But I want to see some firm case law on this before we start basing everything on the collection of trash in like the 1980s. I think that seems like a very weak basis to 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 have to build case law on for DNA. So there you go. Thank you, James, for the compliment. I appreciate that. Sheree says, I'm surprised that no defense attorney is out there trying to use this to make a case. My word, so much content here. Thanks, Sheree. If the police suspect me of rape and I discard my scar in the garbage, do you think the police need a warrant to collect that material? If they want your DNA, yes. Yes. If they want to collect just the, once again, it's the difference between drugs being the concept of the crime or DNA. DNA does not commit any crimes. It's just used, once again, going back to Greenwood versus California. The drugs were the illegal product, and the cops wanted to get it because it was an illegal product. Whereas DNA is not illegal. It's us. When we use DNA in crimes, it's the act that is illegal. All right, not the DNA. I think when it comes to the law, there should be a designated difference. They need to get on the ball and get some laws changed to make sure police need a warrant. Do police need to ask for my DNA? What if I refuse? It all depends on what the actual circumstances, Derek. If they have a warrant, I mean, they may be asking for your DNA because they have a warrant. I don't think that there should be any penalty for us to not give up our DNA. I don't, because it's part of us. Layla, okay, and if I opt in to allow law enforcement access to my DNA, can they trace my family and link it to one who's a possible criminal without his or her consent? Layla, you bring up a great point. Should my DNA be able to be used to get somebody else in trouble? I think that's a great question. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time because I got to make a call at 10:30 tonight. Layla, I think you ask a great question, and maybe we could talk about that in the think tank on Sunday night. I would love to have this discussion more. All I'm saying is that, at least in the United States, because Greenwood versus California doesn't apply anywhere else in the world, only in the United States, that I think it's poor law to base DNA, use warrantless searches for DNA to base it on a case involving the gathering of garbage. Because it's two totally different things. All right, let's get to this case for this Friday. This is the disappearance of Barbara Frame. It is called Wolf at the Door. And this is a disappearance that happened on January 30th, 1985 in Zanesville, Ohio, a city that I've actually been in a few times. And the interview is with Barbara's daughter, Kathy Huber. This is a situation where Barbara had gotten out of a marriage to a guy, Jeff Frame. Unfortunate part is when she moved out, she only moved like less than a block away from him. So even after they were divorced, he would come over and try to get her to go back with him, get married again, or whatever. And of course, she wasn't interested in that. And then one day he showed up, January 30th, and it was Kathy, her daughter, who was 14 at the time, who actually answered the door. And Jeff said that their lawyer had called, and it had to do with their house, the ownership of the house, and she had to sign something so he would have sole possession of it, something like that. And Barbara said, no problem. Okay, well, let's go. She left with Jeff, never to be seen again. Her car was found the next morning in the parking lot, kind of in the parking lot, but not really in the parking lot of where she worked. Okay, and her co-workers had seen it. Now, the tough thing about this case that you will hear, and you will hear Kathy say this on Friday's episode, is that to this day, to her knowledge, Jeff Frame has never given a version of what happened after he and Barbara left her house that day. Never done it. Okay. He took a lie detector test, being that we were talking about these earlier. He was inconclusive. He, of course, as you would imagine, Jeff wasn't a very good guy. You're going to hear about how he was committing insurance fraud, possibly. You're going to hear about how he was dealing drugs and things, and he continued to do this after Barbara disappeared, and he went to jail a few times, and he's still alive to this day, but Kathy has told me he's actually homeless now. But this is one of those cases, I think after you hear the interview, it's one of those, the kind that drives you nuts, where you have a very good suspect. He was the ex-husband. He was the last person to see her. In this case, he actually even came up to the front door, and there have been never any charges against Jeff Frame for Barbara's disappearance in 34 years, over 34 years. This is I think, when you talk about disappearance, a kind of disappearance that drives you nuts, this is that. This is that kind. And I'm sure that a lot of you who know Unfound's case as well, you know that we've had other cases that are kind of like this as well. I think of Linda K. Carroll is one. I think of Rosemary Rapp as another. I think of Julie Early as another one. And these kinds usually do involve women who are the missing person. But this is why the reason it's been called Wolf at the Door is because Jeff had no problem just coming up to the door of Barbara's house, asking her to leave with him under the guise of going to a lawyer, and her never being seen again. Now, you should know the lawyer was asked. There was no lawyer appointment. Totally made up. So, Derek, did they even try to look into him? My God, and he is scot-free? Well, that's one of the things, being that we've been talking about laws in the United States and rights in the United States. Once again, I know these do not apply to anybody who's going to watch this in other countries because they're different. But in the United States, Jeff really he doesn't have to say anything if he doesn't want to. Can't waterboard him or anything like that. But he's just never offered up an explanation. I think, at least in these other cases, another case I think of is Angie Yarnell. Now, of course, her husband ended up going to jail for a few years for her disappearance. But, of course, he's out now and she's never been found. We don't even have that in this case. We don't have it. So, but he's gotten off scot-free to this point, mainly because there's been no evidence that he did anything to her, even though common sense says he probably did. Blaze says, never go anywhere alone with your ex. Blaze, totally true. Totally true. So that is the case for this Friday. Kathy did a great job. It's going to be a shorter episode maybe than usual that you're used to. I think it's less than an hour and a half. But it's a good interview. I really want to thank Kathy for being interviewed. We did the interview Sunday. And the great news also is that I've already done the interview for next Friday's episode. And I'll tell you about it next week. But you don't know how excited I was to be able to do the interview that I did today. And you will hear about why that is next week. But this Friday, the disappearance of Barbara Frame from Zanesville, Ohio, January 30th, 1985. So what did we do? I want to answer one more question, then I'm going to have to go. Amanda asked me, and I don't think she's in here, number one thing that gets between families and finding their missing loved ones. Amanda, I'm guessing you're eventually, if you're not in here, you're eventually going to watch it. That's a tough question to answer. I think that it's different in every case. It could be just because a person doesn't want to talk, like in Barbara Frame's case. It could be that it's just a complete mystery and there's no suspects, there's no DNA, there's no video, nothing. Maybe like Jason Jolkowski. Maybe there's so many suspects that you don't even know which one to pick. Maybe like what would be a good one off the top of my head? I know that we did a one like that recently. Let me pick it out. Um, Let me see, like maybe Jack Hemby from next week. Maybe Kelly Sims. You know, we have these cases where there are just so many suspects, Amanda. It's just hard to say. Um, Really, if I just had to break it down, and I don't mean to be sarcastic about this, but um, the two things that get in the way of families finding their loved ones is the size of the earth, because they're, you know, especially in the United States, the size of the country, and the intelligence of humans, because humans, when we commit crimes, we're very motivated to not get caught. Those are the two, and it causes people to get very creative, and suddenly they all become Einsteins on how to get rid of people. So if I had to be as general, very very general, that's the issue. But if I had to break it down case by case, it's a different answer for every case that's out there. See you, Joyce. I'll see you. And I'm going to go too. Answered a lot of questions tonight. Talk to you about the view, some things I saw last night off my balcony. I talked about my first visitor being my friend Judith. The Jack Hemby poll. I talked about the think tank. Talked about Teresa Butler. Did a long dissertation on DNA. I hope you really enjoyed that. I think I talked about that for over a half hour. And I hope you all got something out of that. I think it's a great topic. I love the topic. And then we talked about the disappearance of Barbara Frame. That'll be Friday's episode, 2 p.m. Eastern. But I'm going to go now. I got to make a call to a private investigator at 10:30. So I got to go. Thank you all for joining me tonight. And I just cannot thank you so much for the support and everything else. You don't know how fortunate I feel. I don't know if you'll ever understand that, but thank you all. Have a great night. Please be safe out there.